there. This is Della Rucker, principal of the Wise Economy Workshop and author of The Local Economy Revolution Has Arrived, What's Changed and How You Can Help. Thanks for joining me today. I took a couple of days off connected to the Easter holiday. Had a chance to visit with my kids, who both live elsewhere now. One is at Ohio State and one is actually doing a co-op right now in Chicago. So had some opportunity to catch up with them a little bit. We're now in the vaccination process, so got a chance to visit my in-laws, and so I hope you've had a little bit of time lately to connect to the things that matter for you as well. We're gonna do a reading today that is the shortest of the first principles. And I'm not usually known for being a short form person, but once I'd written this one out the way it's written, I kind of went, well, I think we said everything that needs to be said on this one. So we'll go with it. The first principles, as a reminder, are the components of this book that really provide the sort of the foundation. It's super difficult, and this was really one of my learnings over the last 5 years. It is incredibly difficult to change our mindset, to kind of shift the fundamentals of our thinking, even when we know that that's necessary. It's incredibly easy for us to just fall back into our own old habits and our own old patterns. And I found myself doing that, even when I didn't want to, over and over and over again. And that meant that when I came back to this book to do the new version of it, it was really important to me to, start to get at that idea with the realization that it's not just about having an intellectual knowledge of, well, we should use this new technique, or we should do something different, or, yay technology, or whatever, but that instead we need to be able to go much deeper and say, fundamentally, this world that I'm working in, this local community that I am an advocate for, or a professional taking care of, or whatever my role is, that I got to really rethink. And so that's why we call it the first principles. It's information that you can sort of put in front of you and check back against, kind of like your founding principles. Ben Franklin actually was a big proponent of doing this, as has been Elon Musk, who is, some people's favorite supporter of the idea of working from first principles. So here's the first principle for today that undergirds the local economy revolution. Beware the magic pill. We all want easy answers. We all want there to be a simple solution. There isn't one. We have to get used to that and commit ourselves to incremental, complex, messy change. That's it. 5 lines. Got that. It's not a limerick, thankfully, but we got that one tight. But there's a lot in that context, and there's a lot in that in that 5 lines that I think we need to unpack a little bit. So I think intellectually, it's very easy for a lot of us to say, oh, well, yes, of course, the world we live in is very complicated, and we can't expect that, one thing will do everything. But politically, socially, just in terms of putting forward something that people will easily understand and people will like, we all want to be liked, right? Whether it's our job or it's the place we care about, we want to be liked. We want the ideas that we put forward to succeed. And so we end up a lot of times going to these sort of magic bullets. And, there's a long list of magic bullets. A lot of big building projects get called magic bullets. Stadiums, convention centers. I pulled a blank all of a sudden. I'm like, dude, I've been saying this for years. Convention centers, big commercial developments, big apartment buildings. The magic bullet is the big thing that just by doing this big thing, somehow that's going to make a big change happen. And I call them magical bullets because it's magical thinking, right? If I just do this, then everything will be wonderful. If I just lose 20 pounds, then, I will have men lined up at my door, or women lined up at your door. Pick what you want. If I just do X, then something that I really want will happen. I don't exactly know how. I don't exactly know why. I don't exactly understand what all the mechanisms are, but I have faith, right? I have faith. If I do this thing, then good stuff is going to happen. And the problem is that we buy into that vision. We buy into that idea. And we say, oh, yes, if we just have faith, if we just work this thing through. And it's really easy then to focus on getting that thing through, making that happen. I can eat lettuce for 2 weeks if that's what it takes to drop those 20 pounds and, have the world at my feet. But then it doesn't work that way, right? How often has a magic bullet in our personal lives or in our communities actually played out the way we got told it would, or the way we wanted it to, or the way we hoped it would, or the way we told ourselves that it would, even if in a portion of our heads we knew that was unlikely because we've been around the block and we've seen this, not play out before. So, and a lot of times, before I go there, I'll say this part. A lot of times we generate things like economic impact studies or design renderings or something idealist, something kind of idealistic that reinforces that idea that if, well, it's going to make this wonderful thing happen. And it's not just me. It's not just that I want it. Look at this drawing. Look at those economic impact numbers. This is going to be fantastic. And, there can be very good things that happen. But there's always opportunity costs, and we don't look at those. And there's always the question of what could we do to make the situation better? Opportunity costs are what we could have done with the money, the time, the resources, the attention, the human bandwidth that we put into the thing. So what have we given up? What have we sacrificed? And did the thing that was our magic bullet actually generate that result? Maybe I lose 20 pounds and I still can't get a date. I'm married, obviously. I'm not looking for dates, but it seemed like an easier example. We built the big new, this is one we see in communities a lot, where we build a big development and we require the first floor to be commercial space. But then we come up against the reality that demand for commercial space is plummeting, for brick and mortar personal space, is plummeting all over creation. It looked like it was going to work because we bought into the magic bullet. We bought into the magic pill. We believed that this thing was just going to make it. It was just going to happen. And for some reason, and I don't exactly know why, that's super appealing to us as humans. It's a human factor. That's why I can talk about it in terms of my personal attractiveness to other people, or I can talk about it in terms of my community's ability to attract residents and businesses and hip cool places and all the stuff that we want. One of the conversations that I had during this sort of family time over the last few weeks was about how companies, so I've got the good fortune of having a brother-in-law who works in sort of continuous improvement for a large corporation, a large manufacturer. And, to me, it's always absolutely fascinating to talk to folks who come out of that kind of an environment. And I have the good fortune of having several in my life that I can kind of reach out to. And when they're dealing with tools and resources and ideas in their context that I often listen to, and then I sit back and I go, why the hell aren't we learning to do that in our local context? So here's one that I learned from my brother-in-law, and it's basically the Deming process. If you've heard of Edward Deming, he came out in the 50s. He did a lot of work with the Japanese car manufacturers in the 50s and the 60s in Japan. He was I believe he was American, but he wasn't really, like, the car manufacturers in the US didn't really want to hear what he was thinking, but the ones in Japan did. And it wasn't until decades later that Deming's ideas and the systems that he developed, and really, in a lot of respects, co-created with his colleagues in Japan. So there's a lot of back and forth in that process. And it was really a co-creation to a great extent, to what I understand. But they came up with a system of maintaining a stance of continuous improvement. And it's a stance, this is the important piece here, it's a stance that is not about magic pills or magic bullets. It's the same thing. It's not about magic pills. It is instead about a very methodical process of understanding what the limits of your current knowledge are. And one of the really interesting things, and then building on that, but as a side note, one of the really interesting things that my brother-in-law said about when they're coaching people, coaching companies and organizations through this process, is they always think the universe of what they know is much bigger than what it actually is. Because the universe of what they think they know includes a whole lot of assumptions and sort of unreflected expectations and received wisdom and things that they're taking as a matter of fact, but they couldn't comprehensively prove, or couldn't concretely prove, rather. So the first thing that one does in this process is identify what is actually the body of known information that you have to work with. And then there's a very clear process. And I looked it up earlier, and now I'm pulling a blank on what the letters are. So give me 1 second. I've got my computer over here. Let me see what happens when I do this. D. All right, this seemed like a good idea until I can't remember the words enough to type. So the cycle is called, there we go. So it's PDCA, and I'm probably going to butcher this. But it is basically, and some people add parts to this, but this PDCA process, so that's the shorthand that people use to, like, remember. And it's plan, design, check, act. Plan, design, check, act. Now think about that a minute. We're starting from a known universe of information, and we're going to try to figure out something that would expand that known universe a little bit. Can we address a particular problem that we have by doing something that's a little different? Well, we don't actually know if that'll work. So how do we go about the process of learning that? Well, first we figure out what we think, what our working hypothesis is. So this is really based on the scientific method. First, we figure out what our hypothesis is. If we change this, what's going to happen? Then we design the system that will implement that change. And up to this point, I think planners and economic developers and people who resonate to those points of view are like, awesome, yeah, we're going to plan it, we're going to design it, we're going to put it into action. But there's two crucial components that, in my opinion, we very typically leave out. We plan, we design, and then we sort of, assume the magic is going to happen. This process says plan, design, check, measure, evaluate, and then act, meaning incorporate it into the rest of the system. And it's worrisome and unnerving and rather uncomfortable to say, I am part of really two professions that have planning as a core component. We plan all the time, right? If you're in economic development, you have strategic plans. If you're a planner, hell, it's in the name. But how often do we do that checking and incorporating in a conscious fashion? We plan and we design and we put stuff into motion and we say, this is going to be awesome. And this is something that I do talk about in the book, and The Local Economy Revolution Has Arrived. Very often we don't go back and check. We don't go back and evaluate whether that thing that we did actually generated the responses that we intended it to. So then we go do it again. And, we have the same optimism and, oh, this is going to be great. And it's all going to work and it's going to be wonderful. And eventually, we start to come up against, sometimes it'll get to the point where the failings, we can't avoid them. We can't hide from them. But very often we just keep doing it. And I think that's part of what costs city governments, elected officials, city professionals, advocates. That's what starts to cost us our credibility. So plan, design or do, check, and act. And we haven't even talked about act much. That's acting is actually incorporating what you've learned into the process, into your processes and your systems going forward from there. But that's crucial. And that's very, very different from defaulting to sort of this belief in a magic pill or a magic bullet. It's profoundly different. And yet, in a world of uncertainty, that kind of approach, plan, do, check, act, that's so much more relevant to a world of uncertainty, a world where we can't always predict what will happen, to a world that is, and to communities that are ecosystems, like we've talked about. Being able to interconnect and being able to understand how those interconnections actually work instead of having some idealized idea that, magic is going to happen. That's critical. That's an absolutely critical underpinning. So those 5 words or those 5 lines that I laid out as beware of the magic pill, there's a lot that underlies those. And the book talks a lot more about questions of unintended consequences and the pitfalls of magic pills. So if you find this useful, if you find this interesting, if you want to be an effective change maker in your community in whatever manner, I'd recommend you pick up a copy of this. The Local Economy Revolution has arrived. It's available any place you get books or ebooks. I particularly have good deals set up at lulu.com, gumroad.com, and you can also get it on Amazon, but you should be able to get it through any bookstore, should be able to order it, any any provider, including Apple or whoever you prefer to work with. So Local Economy Revolution has arrived. Also, I'm getting ready to put out the next Wise Fool Digest, which is a weekly sort of update and a little bit of analysis on some stories that you probably didn't come across in your week's reading, but that are giving us kind of a really important or insightful view into how this new economy is unfolding and what communities need to be doing to be future ready. So I hope that you will take a look at that. It's wiseeconomy.substack.com, and make sure you check that out. So thanks again. I appreciate it. And as I tell folks all the time, because this is hard work and we have to learn to do it differently, but we can go get them. Thanks.